Dr. Chelom E. Leavitt is an assistant professor at BYU, specializing in sex research. Dr. Leavitt's path began with a series of events that eventually led her to her current focus on healthy sex within committed relationships and mindfulness. She first graduated from BYU with a bachelor's degree in economics and went on to earn her law degree from the J. Reuben Clark Law School. She practiced and taught law for 20 years in Eastern Europe, most notably in Ukraine. At the time, Dr. Leavitt observed the growing social issues of family relationships, reflected in the fact that Ukraine had the highest divorce rate in the world at the time, with 60%. This galvanized Dr. Leavitt into taking more classes at BYU in order to understand the risk factors for divorce. Soon after, she went on to earn a master's degree in marriage, family, and human development at BYU. During this time, she was involved in projects such as writing the book Sexual Wholeness in Marriage, which is now used as a textbook for the Healthy Sexuality course. Dr. Leavitt's impact in the sexual health field continued to expand as she went on to earn her PhD in family studies from Penn State. Among her many accomplishments, Dr. Leavitt has been a recipient of the Fulbright Fellowship and most recently was chosen for the Emmeline B. Wells Grant for 2018. Her recent publications include Parenting Stress and Sexual Satisfaction Among First-Time Parents, and her upcoming articles are Different Ways to Get There, Evidence of a Variable Female Sexual Response Cycle, and the Sexual Mindfulness Project. Dr. Leavitt's family has been with her since the beginning of her law career, where she met her husband in law school, and she says that it has been an adventure for them all. She has been married to her husband, David, for almost 30 years now. They have 8 children. The oldest is 28 and the youngest is 2 years old. Her husband says he's very lucky to have a sex researcher as a wife. When asked about what has influenced her to study sex, Dr. Leavitt replied, "It's an important area of our life that unfortunately we're closed about, and yet this is a beautiful part of who we are. The power and nurture of sex is part of strengthening marriage. We ourselves need to gain a healthy perspective of sex and start a community of healthy understanding." We are thrilled to welcome Dr. Leavitt and hear her insights and findings in her presentation, Women's Sexual Mindfulness Project.
Thank you so much for having me here. I am delighted to be able to share with you a little bit of my research, and I hope that my PowerPoint actually can come online. We'll see. But let me first of all tell you that my connection with Emmeline Wells goes back quite a ways. I read a biography on her probably more than a decade ago, and I felt this kinship with her, and I felt inspired by her life. The fact that she was such a fighter and such a promoter of women's issues back in a time where maybe that wasn't as common or as common. And I felt very inspired by a number of the things that she said about the power and influence of women. So I was honored to receive the Emmeline Wells Grant and felt that Emmeline Wells would be really pleased with this research about women's sexuality and the importance of women's sexuality. It's been said that one of the things that can diminish women is to create a confusion around their sexuality. I think it's very important that we understand the value of what women contribute to sexuality. So often, and we'll talk about this a little bit in my PowerPoint once it comes up, but so often sexuality is studied from a male perspective. And so, and not that that's bad, it's wonderful that we have this great understanding of male sexuality, but we're missing so much by not knowing what women contribute and women's perspective in a healthy sexual relationship. So really important for us to now, in our research, kind of refocus and understand better how and what women contribute to the sexual experience. A healthy sexual experience is nurturing and powerful. It's been very distorted in the world today as being just about physical pleasure and just about what arousal our bodies feel. And yet we know from research, at least we have good evidence on small contributions that help us understand that the real power of sexuality is the meaning behind it, the relationships that we're strengthening. We strengthen marriages by strengthening sexual relationships, by helping couples understand the power of their connection, of their unity, of the healing that goes on in a healthy sexual relationship. So very important for us to understand the other half of the sexual relationship, which is what women contribute. Oh, hooray. I know that I've used this example in some of my classes, but I'll use this here so that you understand as well the contribution of what women provide in a sexual experience. We know that if we only had one eye, we could pretty much see everything that's going on in the room, okay? And we could accurately report it. And again, if we just had the other eye, again, we could see pretty much everything that's going on in the room. But it's not until we have both eyes that we have this additional skill, which is depth perception. And so because we understand pretty clearly male sexuality, that's great, it's wonderful. But we've really lost out on this other perspective that's slightly different, and that together these two add something that neither one alone could have, which is depth perception, understanding the meaning of the relationship, understanding what together, that working together, these two, male and female perspective, add to both parties in the relationship. So it really is wonderful. I've been working with Alan Hawkins, Dr. Alan Hawkins and Dr. Jason Whiting, and what we were funded for was an intervention to actually teach sexual mindfulness, which we'll talk about that skill in a little more detail, but to teach sexual mindfulness to a number of couples and then to measure how much they change and whether or not that change is maintained over time. So I've already hinted at this. We know that most sexual research has been done from a male perspective. We've focused on things like intercourse frequency, sexual desire, and orgasm. We know that female sexual satisfaction may be misleading. There was some really wonderful research done by Sarah McClellan, and she looked at what both men and women were thinking about when they answered sexual satisfaction measures. And when it was a simple sexual satisfaction measure like, how much do you enjoy your sex life, a one-question measure like that, men came out and they reported that what they were thinking about was how much pleasure they had, whether or not they orgasmed. It was pretty straightforward. When women came out and talked about what they were thinking about when they answered this question, they said things like, well, I was thinking whether or not my partner had enjoyed the experience, or I was thinking of whether or not I felt any pain, or whether or not I felt safe. And so we see that women, when asked just a very simple, surfacey sort of sexual satisfaction measure, may be answering very different things than what men are. They're not necessarily answering about their own physical pleasure or their own sexual experience at that moment. So important for us to use sexual satisfaction measures that are a little more in-depth, a little more nuanced, that actually ask about how was your orgasm? What was your arousal experience like? Do you feel good about the quality of the relationship? All right, and then we also know that women experience far greater sexual dysfunction than men. Women report about 43% of women report having some sort of sexual dysfunction. Only 28% of men report some sexual dysfunction. So we need to look into why there is this huge increase of percentage of women reporting sexual dysfunction. And then we also know that we really have no effective medication. And more importantly than an effective medication, we really have no effective, or we have had no effective treatments for women's sexual dysfunction. We have had a few treatments for men's sexual dysfunction, like Viagra and Cialis. And even those call into question a little bit the experience of both parties. We know that when men are using Viagra and Cialis, sometimes women report decreased sexual satisfaction because there's a pressure to perform sexually within this certain time period, generally about 3 hours of him taking a pill. And so it adds a little increased sexual pressure and anxiety for both people in the relationship. So one bright star in all of this has been mindfulness. That we've seen some preliminary results that trait mindfulness seems to improve women's reports of sexual functioning and sexual satisfaction, along with a number of other things. We know that trait mindfulness has been defined as the purposeful giving of non-judgmental attention to the current moment. Originally, mindfulness was implemented into kind of a science format to examine how teachers might feel less anxiety and have lower burnout in their professions. So they could kind of relax, learn to adjust, learn to experience all the stress of a teaching environment and still remain calm and aware and present in the moment. Then it expanded into healthy relationships. People started looking at how does being more mindful improve someone's interaction in a romantic relationship. And we saw that there was better emotional functioning and better sexual functioning in some cases. The whole literature of mindfulness has shown us that there are a number of positive outcomes from being more mindful. Increased memory, increased dexterity, increased self-esteem and intelligence, increased spirituality, and reduced anxiety and negative emotion. So a lot of really positive outcomes just from being more mindful. And again, this was just general mindfulness, like as I go about my day, how present and aware am I? How accepting of my circumstances and life am I? Am I non-judgmental in my interactions with other people? And so really quickly, I wanted to, and I'm going to probably have to have someone in the back click on this so that we click to the link, because, maybe right here. I was going to have you do a quick mindfulness activity. If it doesn't work, I can go ahead and just lead us through one. Okay, perfect. All right, so maybe just take everything off your lap and let's just, for a moment, it's all of 4.5 minutes. We're just going to go through this brief mindfulness activity. I have no sound. Oh, I hear something. Okay, that's okay. I don't want to waste our time. Let's just go ahead and I'll lead us through a mindful activity. Go ahead and close your eyes. Just put your hands on your knees. And if at any time you feel uncomfortable in this position, open your eyes and you don't need to participate. And just let yourself relax and take a deep breath in. And go ahead and exhale. And as you continue to breathe, be aware of how that air feels in your body. Is it cool as it comes through your nostrils? Is it warm as you exhale? Just try to clear your mind of any thoughts. Give your mind a break. Just be present in your body. Be aware of how it feels to sit in your chair, to be firmly connected to this chair and to have your feet on the floor. Try to just stay connected to your breath. Very often we get caught up in our mind and we let ideas and thoughts just kind of rotate around in our head. And we lose touch with our body. So allow this to be a moment where you're fully embodied. Maybe your attention is drawn to a particular part of your body. Somewhere that's tense, and as you let your breath out, release any tension that you may feel. Our breath is a beautiful gift, that every breath expands us, and every release of our breath releases tension. Go ahead and take a couple more breaths and then come back to the group. Okay, that's just a simple mindfulness exercise. And as we see, as people practice this, as they become more skilled at kind of settling in to their own body and connecting with it and allowing their mind to just relax and not be filled with all the thoughts that sometimes we get wrapped up in, we find that these skills get stronger. People can kind of come into their body quicker, they remain more present, and it actually extends throughout all of their activities. They're able to be more creative. They're less hampered by anxieties. And so what we find is that practicing this skill increases this skill, just like anything else. So how does this apply to sex? I was in my PhD program and had just learned about mindfulness and was practicing it a little and realized that this was very important as far as a sexual experience. And yet it was very different. Being mindful in our daily life may be very easy compared to being mindful in a sexual experience. Mainly because sex has become kind of this heightened anxiety experience for a lot of people. And it's also become a very socialized experience in that we think that certain things should occur during sex. We have goals that we're trying to reach. We have expectations. We know that women in particular are very critical of their bodies during sex, and or very just self-aware, and so tend to be a little less secure about how they're performing or what it is their partner is thinking about them. So trying to apply mindfulness to sex would require a different sort of measure. We couldn't be asking about, how present are you during your, daily walks across campus, or are you aware when you're eating, or how are your interactions with other people? Instead, we needed to ask things specific to the sexual experience. So how present are you during a sexual experience? How aware are you of the arousal that you're feeling, of the physical sensations that you're experiencing? Are you judgmental about how you experience sex? A lot of women actually feel shame during sex. And so this is something that they would have to practice letting go of and understanding how to be less judgmental of themselves. So sexual mindfulness is actually a state of mindfulness. We know that a trait is something that we just consistently experience, but a state is something that in a particular setting, how we experience something may change. For example, I play the piano, and I play beautifully when I'm by myself. But if I have to go play for Relief Society or for Sacrament, suddenly I have heightened anxiety and I make all sorts of mistakes. Okay, so that would be a state of how I play the piano. And when I play by myself or for my family, that's just my general trait of piano playing. So trait mindfulness is our everyday mindfulness, and state mindfulness, sexual mindfulness, is a state of mindfulness. And so it is the purposeful giving of a non-judgmental attention to the present during a sexual experience. And what's really interesting about sexual mindfulness, just from some preliminary research that's been done, is we know that it has positive associations with sexual satisfaction above and beyond sexual behaviors. So even when people report on how much they're kissing or having intercourse or oral sex, if someone is also being sexually mindful, we see positive associations with sexual mindfulness above and beyond all of these sexual behaviors. So pretty powerful. It has a pretty powerful effect on how people, both men and women, are reporting sexual satisfaction. So remaining remaining mindful in a sexual experience takes a little bit of skills. It takes a little bit of explaining and then helping someone understand how to employ these skills. Awareness comes from being present in the moment, paying attention to the arousal that you feel as you're touched or as you touch, paying attention to the increase in arousal or the thoughts that come to your mind during a sexual experience. And sometimes these thoughts can be negative. And so also trying to just let go of thoughts that may be a little shameful or increase anxiety or where you're just judging yourself. It's interesting, in our preliminary research of sexual mindfulness, we know that women are less sexually mindful than men are. And this kind of makes sense if we look at other research. Men are more aware of their bodies in general. Men are more aware of when they're hungry, of when they're thirsty, of when they're uncomfortable. Women are more other-focused, and so they tend to not think about themselves as much. Now, in a lot of settings, that's a wonderful attribute to have. But in a sexual setting, we see that it's causing a little bit of problem, that women need to be aware of their own experience, and they need to be able to identify it and describe it. So this is a good skill, particularly for women, to be able to practice, to learn, and then to practice. So together, these two dimensions make up sexual mindfulness. So we believe that we can teach this, and this is actually what this intervention was all about. We know that anxiety is connected with lower sexual well-being. And so we think as we teach sexual mindfulness to people, we teach these skills of being aware and non-judgmental, that these two skills will improve. And these improved skills will result in higher sexual well-being. So what we did in the intervention, I'll describe, I have finished the pilot study. We are still in the middle of the full intervention. So I'm going to give you the results of the pilot study today, but let me explain to you both of them at the same time. They followed very much the same format. So we began by going through the IRB process, and then we started recruiting through flyers and Facebook advertisements, a need for participants who were willing to be in a sexual relationship study. So that's all they knew about it. And we did mention that they would learn mindfulness skills, not necessarily sexual mindfulness skills. The intervention was set up in that we had 2 classes. It's a very short intervention, which is part of the attractiveness of it. We were concerned about how well people would be, what the acceptability rate would be of people actually coming to a class to learn about sex. Would that be too embarrassing to talk about sex in a group setting? We had 2 classes. On Tuesday, they learned just about general mindfulness. We practiced a few trait mindfulness sort of skills. We taught also a couple of prep skills, which is a relationship education program. We taught speaker listener skills and problem-solving skills. And the reason we did this is because we know from research that people who begin to study or try to improve mindfulness often have a little increase in anxiety because they become aware of how unaware they were. And so it kind of increases their anxiety initially. And we thought if a couple is doing this together, there might be a few more problems that emerge in their relationship, especially if they're in the sexual mindfulness part of the course, and they're also dealing with increased communication about sexual topics. So the speaker-listener techniques, skills, and also the problem-solving skills, we hoped would increase their ability to be able to deal with this heightened anxiety, and they would kind of overcome it quicker. And then the Saturday session, we gave them some homework on Tuesday that they would do at home, practice for a few days, and then they could come back and ask questions. And then Saturday, we would go over everything again, give them a few more skills, answer any questions they had, and resolve any problems that they were experiencing. And then during the week, for the pilot study, it was just a 1-week process. During that week, they received texts to remind them to do these mindfulness skills. During the full intervention, they received texts throughout the entire 6 months that we're tracking them. And then we collect data. For the pilot study, we just collected it before and after the intervention, and for the full intervention, we do that same pre-post test data collection, but then we also follow up at 3 months and 6 months so that we can see if these skills are maintained over time. All right, and so these are the results from the pilot study. You see that, of course, we had half and half male and female because they were couples. You had to be a couple to attend, and both people had to attend. They had a variety of incomes. The relationship length was about 15 years was the average. But again, we had a range anywhere from, I think, 3 years to over 40 years being married. and then a range of education levels as well. The measures that we used are just listed here. I've given some examples of what those look like. I won't go over each of them unless we have questions in the question and answer period. And here are the results. What we found was that there was a significant increase in relationship satisfaction, as well as sexual satisfaction. We saw no significant change in just trait mindfulness. However, we saw a significant increase in both aspects of sexual mindfulness, being more aware and being non-judgmental. We also saw a huge increase in sexual communication and in sexual problem solving. These are all of those in green were significant increases. And at a significant reduction in anxiety. We saw no changes in emotional regulation, and of all of the sexual behaviors, kissing was the only one that we saw a significant increase, but as you look at the means of all of the other sexual behaviors, all of them did increase from pre to post-test. It just wasn't a significant increase. So very interesting, and especially interesting that kissing increased significantly. We know from research, especially as couples' relationship is enduring, so the longer a relationship goes, the more important kissing seems to be. It's a marker of affection. It's a marker of a healthy sexual relationship. So very important that one, even at this early date, increase. We hope to see in the longitudinal data with the full intervention possibly increases in all of those sexual behaviors as people kind of master this skill and it has more of an impact on their sexual relationship. So we also had some qualitative findings that people made comments in interviews after the intervention. And these are a couple of them. I'll just read a few. They said, I think just looking into each other's eyes, having to do that for a long time, just brought up a lot of positive emotions. This whole notion of the low-level sexual experience is new to me, and I really like it. I feel like it builds trust and affection in each other. And then another, I feel like one of the biggest pluses is that it just gave you a time and a place to have those conversations because we're very open about sexuality and most things in our relationship. I feel like we're pretty open about what we talk about, but sometimes it just doesn't come up. You don't really have a place where you talk about that. And then comments on the relationship changes. They said the class just helped us also to recognize that when insecurities or putting up walls is happening, and to be able to immediately pause and say, okay, what's going on? I can feel a difference in our interpersonal relationship here. What's going on? Let's think about it now. So really nice that not only was this a comfortable setting for people, they reported that they actually really enjoyed the class. They wanted it to go on longer, which is unusual for interventions because usually you're losing people the longer the intervention goes on. And yet here, in this short intervention, we had people actually reporting the opposite, that they wished that we would have had a couple more classes. So we're continuing this work, like I mentioned, in our full intervention. We're presently gathering data and teaching the last week of our classes. We have 2 more classes to teach, and those happen next week. We've already collected data on 6 of the classes, and then we'll finish up with this last one. We will have approximately 100 couples who have participated in this full intervention. And like I said before, we'll collect the data at the pre-post intervention at 3 months and 6 months. So we'll have this longitudinal data. All right, there's some references if anybody wants to take a picture of those afterward. That's a lot of where my research comes from. And then I'm happy to just have the rest of the time for a question and answer. Oh, that's right.
Thank you, Dr. Leavitt. Dr. Leavitt's Sexual Mindfulness Project has taken the common strategy of mindfulness and applied it to the sexual satisfaction of men and women. Motivated by the sexual dysfunction that women experience within their relationships, Dr. Leavitt has been able to create a measure for mindfulness during sex that allows women to focus on their sexual sensations, their touch, and the thoughts and feelings they are having. As data has been collected from studies conducted by Dr. Leavitt, results have shown that mindfulness has created better sex lives, higher sexual satisfaction, and reduced anxiety regarding sex among both men and women. Individuals have been able to focus on nuanced thoughts and have more appreciation for their own body and their spouse. Sex no longer becomes a routine chore, but encourages communication, vulnerability, and honesty between partners. However, this study has provided individuals with much more than the promise of a better sex life. Dr. Leavitt has set out to revolutionize the way women in particular look at sex. Women have a fixed mindset of what sex is, based on how they were taught. It is Dr. Leavitt's goal to ensure that if sex is not enjoyable and special for a woman, it needs to be retaught and reevaluated between partners. More than just providing satisfaction, sex should be deeply meaningful, allow for intimacy, and create a wholeness for both the individual and the couple. The implications of Dr. Leavitt's work are vast and far-reaching for the lives of women. She asserts that women tend to focus on others, putting their pleasure and desires below all else. Sexual mindfulness teaches women not only to be more thoughtful about their sexual needs, but encourages them to apply this concept to every aspect of their life. When women allow themselves to reflect on their goals, desires, and hopes, and use mindfulness in their everyday lives, they begin to see what is available to them that they never had before. While women are known for struggling with a negative body image, sexual mindfulness promotes body positivity, loving and appreciating your naked body, and pushing all embarrassing and insecure thoughts away. In a world of constant media messages about what a perfect body looks like, women can use the confidence they gain about their own bodies in sexual mindfulness to replace these images with their own idea of what is beautiful and focus on the abilities and sensuality they possess. Women can then accept and own their sexuality and no longer need to feel embarrassed about their sexual thoughts and desires. In addition, it is not just the sexual relationship of a couple that improves when mindfulness is being properly used. Couples learn positive communication skills, problem-solving techniques, and become more confident in expressing fears, concerns, and discomfort within a relationship. Men and women are taught to avoid judging their partner, resulting in more compassion and understanding for their spouse in every area of the marriage. Consequently, women will begin to have more compassion for themselves and will judge themselves less harshly. They will better understand how to communicate their thoughts and feelings to friends, family members, work colleagues, and other associates. All these aspects of mindfulness and sexuality can work together to give women a greater sense of wholeness, fulfillment, confidence, and understanding in their everyday life. When properly applied, sexual mindfulness can change the way women see themselves and create a strong self-concept that they will pass on to future generations of women.
So we'll open up the time now for questions and response. So we have just a few minutes, so we might have time for 2 or 3 questions. And I'll start off with the first question for Dr. Leavitt. What are your goals and hopes for long-term intervention and findings with this study?
Thank you. That's a great question. I actually am really inspired by a couple lines in a song, and I'm sure it's all familiar to you, but it's, I dream of what the world can be, a vision of the one I see. I love that this research is going to help women re-image what they think sexuality is. They will understand that they contribute something unique and powerful to the sexual relationship.
And then if you do have more questions, come to the mic on the side. We probably have time for 2. That'd be great.
Yeah, did your study include any same-sex couples? And if it did not, do you expect the results to be different for same-sex couples?
Yeah, that's a really good question. No, it didn't, because this is a pilot study. This is just an early intervention. But we know from other research that same-sex couples seem to be having similar results with mindfulness. So yeah, I would expect that in the future we would include same-sex couples, and we would probably find similar. And if we didn't, it would be interesting as well to see how they differ. Yeah.
Thank you for the research that you're doing and for coming to present to us. It's great stuff to hear. So a friend of mine actually works for Phi New Dog, and she's getting her master's in social work with some associated research in sexuality. She totally hosted like Sunday Soup and Sexuality this past week, and like 40 BYU singles board members were there having a conversation about it. The topic brought up, what does healthy sexuality look like for an individual? And someone asked, what role does masturbation play in that? And that you should be aware of your body and know it, and what relationship would that play? No one really had a good answer, so I was curious about what your thoughts would be on that.
Okay, so what is healthy sexuality first? Is
For
that
an individual.
for an individual? So yeah, I mean, that's part of what I kind of grappled with during my doctoral work is, what is healthy sexuality? What does that really mean? And I think that it's going to be a little individual, right, to the person. What are their goals? Are their goals being met in a sexual relationship? Are they functioning physically, emotionally well? And are they finding meaning in that sexual relationship? And I think that that's kind of the definition that I've settled on, that I think describes what healthy sexuality is. And then your next question, if you had another question.
Yeah, so we were talking about healthy sexuality as individuals. Obviously, it was a BYU singles board. It happens.
Yeah.
And someone asked the question, can masturbation play a role in healthy sexuality for me? No one really had a good answer for that, because they're portraying it as a way of like knowing your body and accepting that this is part of like our eternal life.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, you know, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we have guidelines that prohibit masturbation. And yet, it's interesting because women know their body less well than men do, right? And men, it's quite easy, right? Because your genitals are on the outside. It's all front and center. You learn about your body every day as you get dressed. It's right there. And yet women's genitals are mostly inside. And so we're not as aware of how our body works. So while I do not think that it is not masturbation to know your body, right? Women do need to make more of an effort to understand their body, how it functions, and then once they are in a sexual relationship, how they understand their body and how that transfers to a meaningful, fulfilling relationship with another person.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay.
Okay, so we're out of time, but thank you so much, Dr. Leavitt, for coming and speaking today. Yeah, thank you.